Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you all to the AIMA session on the theme India's Pathway to Success with Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, Chairman 5F World and Honeywell Automation India, Dr. Ejaz Ghani, former Chief Economist, World Bank, and Dr. Harsha Vardhana Singh, former Deputy Director General, World Trade Organizations. A very warm welcome to Ms. Rekha Sethi also, our Director General. Thank you. Before I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Ganesh Natarajan and request him to introduce the speakers and take the program forward, a few words about Dr. Ganesh Natarajan. Dr. Ganesh Natarajan is Executive Chairman and founder of 5F World, a platform for digital startups, skills, and social ventures in the country. He's also Chairman of Honeywell Automation India and Lighthouse Communities Foundation, a central board member of the State Bank of India and Hinduja Global Solutions. Dr. Ganesh Natarajan is an alumnus of BIT Mesra, NITI, IIT Bombay, and Harvard Business School. He has received the Distinction Alumnus Award of IIT Bombay and NITIE and has been recognized by EY and Asia Pacific HR Forum for excellence in technology, entrepreneurship, and people-centric leadership. Harvard Business School has written 2 case studies on Dr. Ganesh Natarajan and his success through vision, communities, and innovation. Dr. Natarajan is an author and co-author of several books on technology, innovation, and leadership. With these few words, I request Dr. Ganesh Natarajan to please take over the session. Thank you, sir.
Sure, thank you very much. And I think my only introduction I would like to give is that I'm a loyal follower of Rekha Sethi and Sanjay Grover. So whenever they say jump, I say how high. So today we are here to talk about something new. And thank you, Rekha, for offering us this opportunity. And I would not introduce Harsha and Ejaz because we've been working together for the last many months in putting out this volume. But as was already mentioned, Harsha has been an expert on trade policy, advisor to the Indian government, and of course, Deputy Director General of WTO. So no better person for him to talk about trade at a time when the world is poised on at a very, very interesting juncture. And Ejaz, of course, having been a professor in India, is a Stephanian, and then, of course, many, many years in the World Bank. And today, he is a fellow of the Pune International Center, which was responsible for this book. And we'll kind of, you'll hear us, all of us briefly. What I will do is I'll give an introduction to why this book, and then a bit about the book itself and what is the broad canvas it's covering. Then request Harsha to talk about trade, and Ejaz to offer his comments. And he's a futurologist, so watch what he thinks is the future of this country. And we're all, as you know, very excited about the country. So let me move to the presentation so that we can get started. Here we are. I hope all of you can see the presentation. Just to tee it off, and I think all of us, I mentioned earlier, are very excited about India at this point of time. And if you really look at it, what are the reasons? So let me take 3-4 minutes to set the context for India and give you the macro story. And then I'll tell you what this book intends to accomplish and what the book coverage is. So this is something that I just stole from the Chairman of State Bank of India, who made a presentation, this presentation sometime back. It's a very detailed presentation. Just 3 slides. But this is something we're all very proud about, as we all know, that we are the 5th largest economy at this point of time, and very likely to become the 3rd, because I think Japan and Germany are ahead of us, but we certainly will overtake them, whether it's in 2 years or 3 years. We've also progressed very substantially. And there are some very interesting WhatsApp videos you have heard about the progress in direct taxation, indirect taxation, the strength of India's financial sector, which kind of almost shrugged off the problems that happened with Silicon Valley Bank and Credit Suisse, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, something I'll talk about, the whole success of the digital economy, which is unparalleled. Not even a Japan or a China or US have really come forward. So this is the first basis for excitement. The second basis is, of course, what the government has done very wisely. In fact, I remember about 3 years back, we were all taken aback. I think all of you will remember, and I spoke about it in AIMA, when China just came and squatted in Ladakh, and which is when in the Pune International Center, 6 of us got together and wrote what was fairly path-breaking book called Facing Up to China, where we argued that facing up to China didn't mean trying to combat them militarily, but really looking at the diplomatic, the economic, and other response. And one of the strong recommendations we had made then was that India has to do something significant in manufacturing. We cannot be an economy that relies on services and very poor productivity agriculture, but you've got to move forward in manufacturing. And I'll come to a slide on that later. But we are delighted that the government of India has put out all these productivity-linked incentive schemes. As many of you know, the electronics thing has already taken off, specialty steels, food products, and there are multiple areas where we are all hopeful that this will happen. In addition, of course, the amazing work that's happening on infrastructure, something many of us have talked about for decades, but it happened with roads, right from Atal Bihari Vajpayee's time to what Mr. Nitin Gadkari has done with transportation, highways, etc. And now it's happening in railways. And Nirmala Sitharaman's, very, very good budget, which really talks about the massive investment in infrastructure, the national infrastructure pipeline, the monetization plan. I think that's quite amazing. And the PM Gati Shakti, which is a master plan that looks at what are the various infrastructure demand that can be taken care of. The third, of course, I mentioned this earlier, is this whole area of the India stack. And this was created, as many of you know, by one of my industry colleagues, Nandan Nilekani, who first came up initially in the previous government and then was immediately sold the idea to Prime Minister Modi that we should be looking at the JAM Trinity. Mobile phones, of course, are a huge success story in this country. But creating the Jan Dhan accounts, creating Aadhaar as a ubiquitous phenomenon for unique identity was Nandan's contribution. And in recent times, of course, we have seen UPI, which is the payment interface is actually growing 50% every quarter. It's one of the most widely used payment platforms. And as all of you know, everybody from a chaiwala to a senior person prefers to use UPI and payment and Google Pay and Bharat Pay, etc., rather than pay cash. So that's one great thing that's happened. Essentially, now we're looking at whether it's education, agriculture, food security, finance, health, the circular economy or sustainability. All that will happen through digital platforms, which will be based on people's consent, will be completely cashless, will be based on transfers, paperless entirely, and presenceless. You can literally operate in any of these platforms anywhere in the world. And now, of course, I won't get into that, but we're talking about something called the Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC, which is Nandan's next favorite tool. And that will ensure that digital commerce literally flattens the boundaries between the haves and the have-nots in this country. And if any of you are interested, we can discuss it in the Q&A. So just quick on pathways. As I mentioned, we wrote the China book. It got a lot of very, very good response, not only in India. We even got a couple of calls from people in China saying, how can you say this? This is not true, etc. And it was, I think, fairly balanced. We talked about the success story of China. We are by no means people who are anti-China. But we also said that, look, while China was kind of going through a bit of slowdown thanks to COVID and slightly bad management of the pandemic, and India had done a brilliant job, he said, here is our opportunity. So quite a few people in government, academia actually talked to us and said, why don't we write a specific book on India? Saying if India has to build the next decade, what are the pathways to success? So that is the genesis of this book. And very quickly, I think, where are we today? I mentioned some of these, success of JAM and the UPI. We're a young country with very favorable demographics, as all of us know. There's a huge youth bulge that we are seeing, which of course has to be handled well, which I'm sure Ejaz will talk about a little later. I mentioned this earlier, banking, financial institutions, very robust, very strong infrastructure focus. Most important, we want you, me, everybody else, even the young people of India, want to see 2030 becoming the decade of India. And of course, this century being the century of Asia. In this context, we have started in this book by analyzing the three core sectors of any economy: agri, industry, that is manufacturing, and services. And agri, of course, we all know that only 20% of GDP, which is not good enough for a 52% population employed in it. Unfortunately, lots of feminization today, because thanks to COVID, a lot of young girls who should be in school have started working in the farms, which is something we need to correct. Interestingly, what used to be a pure rice and wheat economy, people have kind of realized that there is a lot more in non-food produce. So fruits, vegetables, a lot of things are happening, but it still needs to increase. Manufacturing, as I mentioned, there were huge asymmetries with China. So in our previous book, we actually identified which are the areas where we need to get closer to China, which is outstanding, whether it's the pharma industry or information technology. And most important, which are the areas we need to really invest in? The electronics manufacturing, or what we call core ICT, was one of those. And many of the PLI areas are really taken. One challenge we still have in our country is that the adoption of technology by SMEs, what we call Industry 4.0, has remained low, something we need to address if the whole country's manufacturing economy has to come up. And of course, infrastructure will help it in a very substantial way. Services, I mean, as I mentioned, I come from the IT services industry, ran companies in it for 30 years. And one thing that started off that only 7 cities were really contributing to 93% of the industry has changed. But even today, it's only 40 cities which contribute to the $220 billion economy. So there's still a huge agglomeration in urban clusters, which is something we've addressed in the book. And of course, today, a lot of people are worried that with ChatGPT and what is called generative artificial intelligence and large language clusters, maybe people will not be required in the future. But this is something we've heard, I mean, every decade when some new technology comes. But there are future threats from automation, from ChatGPT, and even from attitudes, because young people should not believe that a country as large as India can be built without hard work. So one of the things that many of us keep talking about is the need to do a lot of hard work to make the economy happen. The digital economy, I mentioned this earlier. I mean, the core ICT business, today I said the IT services business in India is 220 billion, but the opportunity is 1.8 trillion. Design, new services, manufacturing, chips, etc., etc. Broadband highways, I mean, already we are talking about in every one of 650,000 villages in this country, can there be 100 Mbps access? Because Wi-Fi, unfortunately, fades away when you move away from the top cities. The platform economy I already mentioned, beyond UPI in all those sectors. AI, of course, artificial intelligence, which most countries are investing heavily in. India, to my mind, is still not as active as, let's say, China has been for a decade, or US is, or let's say the Nordic countries are. But potentially, in the global economy itself, you'll see a 15 trillion bump up by AI, and we need to look at that. And of course, things like digital adoption, metaverse, which is immersive reality, Society 5.0, which was pioneered by Japan, where whole country is thinking of using technology to improve the lot of every Japanese citizen, something we clearly need to do. And so finally, I think if you look at what we covered in the book, Ejaz, of course, is an expert in this area, but we talked about reverse urbanization and how the future of urbanization should be. We've written a full chapter on mobility and sustainability and how the conversion of atoms to bits, as we call it, which means that instead of people moving to work every day, can the work move to them thanks to digital technology? Dr. Mashelkar, who is the president of the Pune International Center, has written a wonderful chapter on STI, which is, of course, the science, technology, and innovation. And just to give you a data point, I mean, India's research budgets today are less than 0.7%, whereas Japan, Germany, US invest 3% every year on research. Clearly something that academic institutions, industry, and the government need to look at. The other big problem, which I alluded to earlier, is the women's participation in the economy has been weak, become weaker thanks to COVID. And many of us who are very concerned about the gender balance, not only in corporations, but in every walk of life, government, everywhere else, how do we ensure? And there is a very interesting chapter on how to make this happen. And this may well be the topic of a future full book by the Pune International Center. Livelihoods for all, and I'll talk about this in the last slide. And the most important is no Indian left behind. We cannot be a country where the gap between the rich and the poor keeps increasing. America is suffering because of that. I think we have to make sure that everybody is included in a very collaborative liberal democracy that we want to build in this country. So this is the point I was making, that unfortunately, many of the skills missions launched with great fanfare and great objectives have not achieved very much, because in the initial phases, I remember with a lot of investment in skills, less than 10% of the people from the underprivileged societies were actually taking up jobs. And even out of those, 40% would drop out in 3 months. So we are now looking at models which can ensure that we have a sustainable program to get people to work and get good livelihoods. Education, again, is, the good old days when we used to just go and do an engineering degree and we were set for life have gone, because things are changing so fast. The world is changing. Lifelong learning becomes important. Aspiration, skills, and placement for the underserved, which is something that I personally do a lot of work in. Career development centers. There are ITIs all over the country. Are we using them to full potential? In fact, one of our companies just signed a MOU with the government of Maharashtra which is to see, in all the ITIs, can we have other people who are not just joining the ITIs, but also use the enormous space they have to make this happen on a large scale basis, career development and skills for the underserved. Special push I mentioned needed for women's entrepreneurship, which we mentioned. And of course, we need to adopt the UPI method and have platforms where we can integrate academic institutions, good, well-meaning mentors and students from every walk of life. So I'll stop here and request Harsha to talk about this. But as I said, this is the coverage of the book. It comes from the Pune International Center, which was set up by Dr. Mashelkar, one of India's most eminent scientists, and Dr. Vijay Kelkar, who again needs no introduction, the most successful finance secretaries of our times. And we are fortunate that we have 13 extremely bright people who are experts in their own domain who've contributed. And one of those, probably one of our best, is Harsha Vardhana Singh. So Harsha, over to you for your thoughts on global trade, and then we'll move to Ejaz.
Thank you very much. Thank you. 2030 is a year which is talked about in several policy documents, including international trade. Ganesh pointed out that in terms of GDP, India is the 5th largest economy, and by 2027, IMF forecast suggests it will become the 3rd largest. But in trade, it's not really as highly ranked as in terms of GDP. It's the 13th largest exporter in the world. And now we are entering a time period when the transition we had in terms of ranking for GDP is perhaps likely to begin now, because this year India's total exports are about 760 billion, but they are expected to be 2 trillion by 2030. And that's the kind of target which India is aiming at. And by 2035, India will be, from 13th, it will become the 4th largest exporter in the world. So now this is a period of transition. Somebody I saw had asked a question that we have been hearing, that India will do very well, this is India's decade, etc. Whatever has been the performance, it has laid the foundation, at least in international trade terms, for a surge which will see India occupying a much larger position in terms of GDP, trade, etc. And trade is very, very important if you really want to have a large economy, an economy where you have the surplus to take care of the inclusive policies which Ganesh talked about. And no other economy in the world has, or no economy in the world has grown fast without a surge in trade. So what are the objectives of India in terms of 2030? I've already mentioned 2 trillion. To improve global rank, increase India's contribution to global value chains. I will refer to them as GVCs, just for short. Large part of international trade now occurs through global value chains, where multiple countries are involved, and there are many different large and small firms which take part in that. India's participation in global value chain trade is much lower than the average. In fact, even lower than its shares. If you see the share of India's exports in total trade, India's share of global value chain exports is lower than that. So India is focusing in a big way on global value chains, and rightly so. I'll explain why. The other part of trade policy objectives is that India wants this surge in trade policy to be inclusive with MSMEs, women, towns, villages, etc. So how do we go ahead is what this chapter talks about. We need to learn lessons from those who have done better. The first thing which strikes you is that in general, those who have done better, including large economies, they have a strategic approach to international trade policy. India as yet has not adopted that. So that's the first kind of point emphasized. If you want a strategic approach, what should that strategy be all about? So that's another point discussed there. And another insight in terms of trade policy is that trade policy is a national level policy. which is used together with other large policies such as industrial policy, technology policy, energy policies, etc., because it is at the crossroads of all these concerns. For instance, if the government of India has been very concerned about trade deficits, but if you see what is the trade deficit driven by, it is largely import of fuels. And today, the emphasis which the government has put on green hydrogen, on low carbon growth, that will play a big role in improving the Indian capability in terms of trade, as well as addressing some of the larger problems of trade. And that cannot happen unless you are integrating with the world. Second thing is global value chains are very, very important, as I just said. But after COVID and the US-China trade tensions, resilience of global value chains has become a big thing. And in terms of resilience, you cannot achieve that without integrating your plans with other coalition partners, so to say. So a lot of international trade now, policy now also involves making groups which are like-minded. So in the conceptual framework, in this background, the focus on global value chains would be a good way to approach the issue. Why? Because you compete in terms of time, lower cost, and quality, and standards. So all these require raising certain kind of skills, certain kind of abilities, and it cannot increase unless there is experience on the job. And that is the kind of strategy and policy which India needs to come about with. India has begun to do that. In electronics, it has already started, but a much more structured way of integration of the local with the foreign has to take place. Another thing is that in a global value chain, production takes place in multiple locations. So you have to, if you want GVC growth, have to coordinate with states, with companies, and the center, within the center, various ministries and departments. So an efficient policy chain has to be developed, where technologies, which Ganesh talked about, become crucial. Coordination and consultation, because information needs to be transferred very quickly, but it has to be relevant information. So this is the conceptual framework which the chapter talks about. And the policy focus has to be, given GVC insights, reduce time and costs of operation, both at the border and inside the border. Which means you have to reduce the compliance burden. Compliance is all the regulatory regimes which are put in place. Are they really necessary for efficiency? Can they be improved and the burden be reduced? And how do you judge how they can be improved? By looking at international benchmarks. So you have to both look at benchmarks, identify areas of action, and monitor effective implementation. Keep the larger picture in mind, because no country has grown without focusing on scale of operation. We have this in front of us, which requires large investment. And when you go for large investment, the mindset of a policymaker has to be very different, because large investment means all the achievements which you have managed in the last decade, 2 decades, they happen over 2 to 3 years. And the systems, the way you treat risk from policy, etc., it just has to change, and you have to be very alert. You have to have stable policies, and you have to think of ecosystems rather than just one industry or one firm. But ecosystems are built by firms and industries. The factors I talked about, competitiveness, and if you cannot take your MSMEs with you, you will not develop the ecosystem in the manner where the developments take root. And when this happens and production increases in a large market like India, that's when exports start taking place. With an ecosystem, innovation starts taking place. Value addition starts taking place, which leads to further and larger exports. And then the cycle of scale continues. So thank you, Ganesh. That's the message I wanted to give.
Thank you, Harsha.
All this is summarized in the chapter.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harsha. A couple of questions that have come up, which I'll ask you later. So, Ejaz, would you like to take this forward in terms of your slides on the future focus for India?
Thank you, Ganesh. Thank you, Anoobhav and Rekha. There's not much to add. We have got a clear picture. Ganesh has given a comprehensive the pathway that India is likely to become the third largest economy in 2030. And Harsh has talked about how trade can propel the growth. I think that's a good pathway, and I think the policies are being put in place for India to achieve become the third largest economy. So what I'm going to do is to identify, are there any risks? I saw a lot of comments coming that we always portray the future to be very optimistic, but we don't achieve it. What might be these two risks? And it just struck me that AIMA can play a critical role in managing these two risks, because these two risks are closest in their agenda, as Rekha pointed out right up front. So what we did was, with the Harvard Business School, gathered the millions of data on enterprises in 600 districts in India, using the ASI and National Sample Survey data. And in these 600 districts, we asked, what promotes entrepreneurship? There are two drivers of growth which are critical for India to become the third largest economy: promoting entrepreneurship and innovation. When we examine the data, the entrepreneurship is defined as number of new enterprises being established every year. India ranked pretty low on that. And on innovation, India ranked pretty low. Now, the policies are being put to improve them, but AMI can really monitor what's happening on entrepreneurship and innovation. We have to keep in mind that entrepreneurship is the number of new startups, and there is a very close relationship in job growth and entrepreneurship. Most of the jobs are created by new enterprises, not established enterprises. Enterprises less than 3 years old. So promoting entrepreneurship promotes growth and it promotes jobs. The two key drivers of entrepreneurship and innovation, then we asked, why do some districts have many more startups than others? And two things stood out: investments in physical infrastructure and investments in human infrastructure. If these two can be scaled up, India will produce many more new enterprises, and this will also help in the innovation ranking. Here, AMI can play a big role, and the other things that will add to propelling India's growth further would be the rise of the middle class, participation of women, more inclusive spatial development. But let me go back again to investments in physical and human infrastructure. The future growth of India will not be driven in mega cities. Mega cities are too expensive now. It's all manufacturing and services sector are shifting to tier 2, tier 3 cities. Now, I'm from Bihar and I live in Delhi too. There's a huge difference in the amount of physical and human infrastructure. So the investments in human and physical infrastructure have to be scaled up much more in tier 2, tier 3 cities to promote many more new entrepreneurship, create more jobs, and for India to become the third largest economy. Let me stop here. There's a lot of material. All of them are available in the book, or if you just type Google, entrepreneurship, with Harvard Business School, it'll throw up.
Thank you, Ejaz. And let me just, if any of you need to go through the full detail that Ejaz has sent us, and he summarized it very beautifully. So do write to AIMA. I'm sure they can send you the PDF of this presentation. I'm happy to answer questions based on that. So let me close with 1 or 2 slides, which just talks about how we did this. Because I still remember when we were finishing writing the book, and as I said, there were 13 collaborators for this book, and we finished it in October. And then, of course, the publisher said that, look, we need a strong forward from somebody. And we had a quick chat at the Pune International Center, and we said that the ideal person to write this would be Mr. Narayan Murthy. And I remember writing to Mr. Narayan Murthy, and he wrote back saying that, look, I'm very busy now for the next 3 months. When do you need this forward? So I said, Mr. Murthy, can we have it in a month? He said, impossible. And our publisher immediately said, no, can we find somebody else? I said, look, I worked with Mr. Murthy for 3 decades. I know who the man is. And sure enough, he wrote back again then saying that, look, when do you seriously want it? So we said, now it's shortened even further. We wanted it in 2 weeks. Then he again said, no, I can't. The next morning, I get a call from Mr. Murthy saying I was sitting in the Air France lounge in Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, and I wrote the forward. And it is not what you expect it to be. It's a forward on culture. And it is an amazing forward, ladies and gentlemen. If you read the book, even if you don't read the whole book, do read the introductory chapter, the epilogue where we talked about the future of India. And most important, read the forward by Mr. Narayan, because he really will touch you in terms of what and many of the questions are asked that you're asking is answered by Mr. Murthy saying, what is the culture of success that we need to embed in the country to make it happen? And our dedication is to the youth of the country. And as Mr. Murthy rightly said, India will be truly successful if we can bring better hope for the poorest child in the most distant village of the country. So I'm going to stop here. I'll stop the screen share so that we can all see each other. And then maybe we can throw it open to questions. So let me take a couple of questions. And Ejaz, there's an interesting question that I thought you should address. And let me just find this. Yeah, they mentioned about, how about 2030? He was saying, would we really lead the global economy? What do you think can go right or go wrong? You addressed that. But are there 2 or 3 things you would like to point out to the audience saying, these things we must get right as a country? And you've been both within and an observer of India. So what would you recommend are the pathways? Ejaz, you're on mute. You're still on mute. Yeah, has somebody muted him? AIMA? No. Ejaz, you're still on mute.
Please unmute yourself, sir.
Just press the unmute button. No. So while Ejaz unmute, Harsh, let me ask you the question that is probably uppermost in everybody's mind, because everywhere we go in the country, we see the blue and white and green in the lights of G20. So somebody is asking me, what is the real value of G20? Do you think it will do something for India's position globally? What would you say, Harsh?
Thank you. It's interesting that this question is being asked because we really don't conceptualize how certain global problems or global solutions are the way to pave for success in our major problems or concerns. When I was talking about international trade, I did it in the context of a larger background of what we need to achieve through industrial policy, technology policy, etc. Similarly, there are many issues which you cannot solve by yourself. The G20 itself came up, it was revived by President Obama after 2008 because the US and every other economy realized that the problem the world faces requires working together. So the value of G20 then was seen in the initiatives which were made at that time. In some sense, we are again in the same kind of situation where the world is torn asunder by number of concerns, the war which is taking place, the impact of COVID, the trade tensions, geopolitical movements, etc. This is the time when new issues have come up. I talked about resilience of global value chains. This is the time when solutions can lead to reaching to assuaging the concerns of a large population. So what India has emphasized in G20. So one, it's a platform which is needed, especially now as it was needed in 2008. Two, the fact that India is giving leadership, it puts India in the forefront for both providing solutions and seeking solutions. So it is a platform through which a lot of Indian solutions are being taken up by a number of countries. And I would put digital there right up front. Ganesh talked about UPI. Several countries today are actually using that. What that implies is that we also, given the fact that there are foreign exchange problems of several countries, India has also started this initiative of allowing countries to trade with INR. So that is one set of issues. Indian solutions, which are seen as solutions for several others. Second, you cannot, in a world with, say, global value chains, or a world where large problems arise, such as pandemics, you cannot address the issues without such large countries coming together with small countries. G20 is not only large countries, it also includes representatives of the small countries. And the third thing is, what India has decided is that it will have the events of G20 across the country, not just in large cities. In small cities where states can bring up what they can achieve, what they have achieved, and what is of interest to others. It can lead to tourism, it can lead to other economic partnerships. And very importantly, India is emphasizing tangible progress through solutions on the ground. And this G20 will result most likely, I've been involved in the discussion, so I know what's being aimed at, most likely in tools which countries can use together to improve their logistics problems, reduce their costs, increase the stability of their production processes, increase skills, make progress more inclusive. So G20 has a very large canvas, and it's being managed very coherently with very strong focus on substantive results on the ground. So yes, it is needed for the moment, and India's position there has made it a very important country in the world. And what India is doing in that context, plus combining all different parts of India in that process, it will mean a big surge in both aspirations of India and how others will see it.
Thanks, Harsha. I think there's one more question for you, which I'll come back to later. So Ejaz, I was just asking that, in fact, to articulate the question the way it was asked, given our population, what do we need to focus on disproportionately so that we make the demographic dividend still work for us? I mean, what are those areas which the youth of the country should focus on for nation building?
Thank you, Ganesh. I'm connected. So I did emphasize two downside risks, which is lack of progress on entrepreneurship and lack of progress on innovation that could derail India's path to success. Let me flip the question now and say, what are three things that will help India achieve the rapid pace of growth and become the third largest economy? Those three things will, in my mind, include the demographic dividend. Now, India has the largest youth bulge in the world. China, Europe, and USA is rapidly aging. There is a lot of evidence to show that it is young people who save and invest more. Old people have less savings and less investments. So the path to scaling up the physical and human infrastructure with increased savings, increased fiscal space, will work for India in terms of the demographic dividend. The second thing I would highlight, which will propel India to a faster pace of growth, is the rise of the middle class. While the middle class is shrinking everywhere, India's middle class is rising rapidly. And the third thing is the fastest pace of urbanization that India is experiencing. You need cities to promote enterprises in the manufacturing and the services sector. It is now shifting from mega cities to tier 2, tier 3 cities, but tier 2, tier 3 cities need more investments, both in physical and human infrastructure, to promote entrepreneurship and innovation. And if I may also add, we have a large proportion of women who are still to join the labor force, and they have been absolutely superb. India has taken very unique growth path. It was the first country to become the exporter of modern services. So India can do it. If it's highly innovative, it can take different paths. Another very interesting thing, which, I don't know as I'm being optimistic or pessimistic, is with the Harvard Business School, when we examine the data on enterprises, it's the small enterprises that have exploded in the global value chains. They have shifted into the tradable sector. The large enterprises have expanded in the non-tradable sector. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it because India is a vast country with a large middle class. But keep in mind, the entrepreneurship and innovation needs to be inclusive, and we need to propel the small enterprises that Harsh has already talked about. Thanks. But I think in the fact that India has the largest youth bulge, the rise of the middle class, innovative growth paths that India has taken, would make me an optimist for India's 2030 outlook.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ejaz. And let me take a couple of questions, because I think Mr. Anil Kumar Pillai has said, how can we ensure that the skills development programs of the future are successful, particularly ones where private and government sectors have collaborated in many states? So let me answer by just taking two companies where I'm very actively involved on the board and advising them. One is an entity called Educate Girls, which was started by a lady called Safina Hussain out of Mumbai. And we work in the tribal districts. We started in Rajasthan, moved to Madhya Pradesh, moved to UP, now starting in Bihar. And the basic idea is that if a girl child stays in school and does not get dragged into household work or agriculture, then we will build a better economy. And we've now worked with almost 700,000 young girls and also giving them hope for their careers. And that's a classic example of a good public-private partnership, because Educate Girls will ensure that the schools are ready for good education, works with the governments. The governments are very supportive because we're adding to their agenda. And on the youth side, if you look at what we do in Lighthouse Communities Foundation, and that is a classic public-private partnership where the public sector or the government or the municipal corporations provide all the facilities for, in every slum community, to set up what is called a lighthouse, where we would give them aspiration, a choice of skills, give them the skills of their choice, not the skills we want them to do. We don't want to set up a plumbing school and say everybody learn plumbing, but really offer them a whole array of skills so that they can come in, learn, and we mentor them all the way to 1 year on the job or as entrepreneurs. And these are very successful partnerships. And I personally believe, for instance, Lighthouse Communities works with the governments of Delhi and Odisha and Maharashtra, as I mentioned earlier. It works with the municipal corporations in Kalyan and Pune, and now from this Wednesday onwards in Hyderabad, the greater municipal corporation of Hyderabad. And we have seen tremendous need to make this happen. Because as somebody rightly said, and we've discussed this earlier, the demographic dividend can become a demographic disaster if we do not enable our children, our youth, to find or to dream their own dreams. I mean, who are we as middle class or upper class people to say that, look, yeah, the people who are underprivileged cannot dream and they should follow our rules? Because if everybody has their own point of view in a democracy, I think we will make that happen. So I think that is really the success of public-private partnerships. I would ask either of you to respond to this question, saying what are the prospects of the rupee being an international currency, and what will then be the impact on the Indian economy? Harsh, any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Ganesh. There are certain criteria for a currency to be considered an international currency. We are far from that at present. But a process to move in that direction has begun. As the Indian economy becomes stronger, as it achieves a larger level of credibility and strength and stability, the confidence in the currency will increase, and it will be used not only for trade with India, but also for other kind of trades. So the prospects today can be summarized as follows. The journey has begun, but becoming an international currency is a longer term possibility. But given the way the economy is growing, and it's from a third largest, it could even by 2047, 2050, it could even become the second largest economy, which means it can even in economic terms, and I'm talking here nominal dollars, not PPP dollars. In nominal dollar terms, it could even overtake the United States of America. Of course, per capita income of United States will still be very, very high. But this shows that the kind of interactions it will have through investment, through trade, through transfer and exchange of services, its presence in different large services areas, its growth in dynamic sectors, the use of technology to include larger part of the largest population in the world. And moreover, by 2047, 2050, India will in effect provide the labor force for a large part of the world. If you see all the developed economies, you can see that they will have a labor shortage. In fact, it had begun even before COVID. And the Indian labor force participation rate is remaining stable till about 2050. So it will, when large number of people, whether electronically or going in person, interact with other economies, the acceptance of this currency will be more and more. So yes, by 2050, we will be far better placed. But at the moment, we have just begun.
So Harsh is being a realistic optimist. So Ejaz, I'm going to put you on the spot by asking you a very, very poetic question articulated by Vinay Choleti. He says India's economic divide is only increasing. The income disparity has increased significantly. Top 10% of income earners had 39% of income in 2016. Today it's 56%. At the same time, the bottom 50% of income earners have 14% of the income compared to 21%. So he says the jaws of economic divide are widening pretty rapidly. So are we really ready for equitable growth in this country?
The answer is a very simple one. Scale up investments in physical and human infrastructure in the lagging regions. The spatial divide between leading and lagging regions have increased. That is a concern to many people. But hopefully, as we scale up investments in physical and human infrastructure in tier 2 and tier 3 cities and in the lagging regions, that will become the future drivers of growth, because that is where the large manufacturing enterprises are moving into, away from mega cities into tier 2, tier 3 cities and places that have not yet been developed because it's more cost competitive. So for India to become a large manufacturing powerhouse, these investments will scale up and grow will become more inclusive in the future.
Excellent.
Can I?
Please, Harsh.
Quickly
And also maybe you
address
can just
it
comment on the other question saying exports are scaling up, but imports are scaling up faster. How do we address that balance?
No, I agree with Ejaz. That's the way forward. But increasing inequality is taking place in most places. When the 2008 major financial economic crisis hit the world, the countries which had some safety nets, which actually address the concerns of the less economically strong part of the population, were able to address it in a better way, so to say. So, if you see what India has begun to do, India, and it's using technology in a big way, financial inclusion, direct transfers, provision of food to those who are below certain levels of income. So, and the emphasis, and somebody had talked about water also, emphasis on clean water, and something which has been emphasized for several years, but needs to be continued to be taken forward, is female literacy. Once you actually start moving forward on this, and India has begun to move forward on this, in some sense, more comprehensively with the JAM Trinity, etc. When you move forward on this, if you see, one is income levels, the other one is how do you meet basic needs? So when you look at, there was a lot of literature on basic needs, and they try to evaluate what actually improves the capability of a society to address their basic needs. So these schemes are important, but the two most important items identified in that context were female literacy and clean drinking water. And once we keep focusing on that, together with the kind of institutions which Ejaz talked about, plus the JAM, I think we will be able to be in a better situation where you take the safety net higher and higher for most people, with income levels increasing. And yes, you have to address the inequality. It's a reality. The only way to address it is by empowering the middle class and the lower income persons, which Ejaz talked about. So it's again a long road, but progress is being made in that context. It needs to be consolidated and taken forward.
Great. Since we have only 4 minutes.
And on imports, may I talk? Sorry, Ejaz, go ahead.
No, if you're finished, I just want to add the importance of job creation.
Yes.
In the inclusive society. And the only source of job creation is what AIMA does, promote entrepreneurship. So if you scale up the number of new enterprises being established, then many more jobs will be created. And that will make the economic growth even more inclusive.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ejaz.
Can I talk about the import side?
Yeah. Your 1 minute.
Okay. Exports are increasing, and you are saying imports are increasing faster, but that is the truth in most economies, which have actually grown. But some of them have converted their deficit into surplus. And the way is through investment, through engagement with global value chains, through improving skills, infrastructure. A classic example is Vietnam. If you see some of the other East Asian economies, they have also achieved it. And in all this, female literacy and female participation is very, very important, as is building skills. Entrepreneurship takes place in the background of a growing economy. If you don't have a growing economy, you cannot just have the entrepreneurs coming. They'll just fight over the available meat, so to say. So the efforts being made to grow the economy, plus to grow it in a way which is inclusive, that is the combination which we need.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. And let me just take the last minute to summarize a little. And I think all of us are agreed on one thing, that the potential of India is not questionable, because we are seeing it happen. What we were lacking in terms of infrastructure, I mean, I would say in physical and digital infrastructure, well being addressed. We still have work to do or a way to go on social infrastructure. I mean, if you look around and see what happened in West Bengal and Sasaram and Bihar in the last 2 days, I mean, it pains people. I mean, I grew up like Ejaz mentioned, he's from Bihar. I grew up in what was then one of the poorest villages in Bihar, a little village called Tatisilbai near Ranchi. And my best friend was this little boy called Fantush, who's still there in the village of Tatisilbai and Ranchi. So in fact, I was doing a TED talk in San Francisco 5 years ago, and they said, you just choose a topic. I called it Fantush on the Beanstalk. The idea being that some of us grasp a beanstalk called education and climb up. So when we talk about skills, when we talk about better education, I think if we can all take it as responsible educators, professionals on this group, and in fact in the entire country, and say we will not be divisive, we will be inclusive, we'll make sure that as many people as possible get a chance at their kind of day in the sun, I think we'll make it happen. We have big challenges. I don't think anybody should fool ourselves that it's not a challenge for the country. But I mean, I was in Manila in Philippines for the last 3 days, and I saw a full city that has been built called the BGC in the heart of Manila, which has come up in the last 15 years. And the enthusiasm of young Filipinos working in the BPO sector is absolutely mind-boggling. So, which is what I said earlier in the services part. I mean, we have to ensure that there is no cynicism that sets in. India's pathways to success are many, many, but with physical, digital, and social infrastructure, with agriculture, manufacturing, and services, with urban and rural economy coming together, and India finding its place in the world, I think we will truly be successful. So we are all optimists, as you can see, and we hope that we have created a few more optimists in this group. Thank you very much. Thank you, folks. So,
thank you, sirs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
On behalf of AIMA, we take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, Dr. Ejaz Ghani, and Dr. Harsha Vardhana Singh for addressing the participants today. Thank you, sirs. Sir, would like to share with you that today's session has been attended by over 500 people on AIMA social media portals, and we had about 250 people joining us on the Zoom platform today. We'd also like to thank the participants for taking out to join us today. We look forward to having the participants again with us on another program of AIMA. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, sirs. Thank you, ma'am. Have a good evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ganesh. Thank you, Dr. Ghani, and thank you, Dr. Harsh. Pleasure having you all with us. And I think you can see from the comments that the participants rated your session very highly. So thank you so much for doing a wonderful session for AIMA.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Always a pleasure.
So do take a look at the comments.
Okay, we will. Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.